The Duke chose her beautiful sister at the ball, but couldn't forget the quiet woman in the corner. Everyone in the ballroom watched the Duke of Mere choose Edith Fenworth, everyone except the one person who had known, with quiet and absolute certainty, that he would. Rosalind Fenworth stood near the far window with a glass of ratafia she had not touched, and she watched her younger sister laugh up at the most powerful man in 3 counties. And she felt something in her chest complete a long, slow closing, the way a door juts in a house that is being abandoned. Not dramatically, not with tears, simply with the soft, final click of a thing that is finished. She had told herself for 3 years that what she felt for Edmund Ashby, Duke of Mere, was nothing, a foolishness. The residue of a single conversation at a garden party in the summer of her 19th year, when he had sat beside her under a willow tree and talked for 40 minutes about everything and nothing, and had looked at her, truly looked, with grey eyes that seemed to find her thoughts before she had finished thinking them. She had told herself that he would not remember it. Men like him did not remember quiet women at garden parties. She had been right about that. He had not recognized her tonight when they were introduced. She had watched the non-recognition move across his face, courteous and blank, and she had curtsied and said the correct things and moved away before he could see anything in her expression that she could not afford to leave visible. She was 24 now, and she had a secret that would destroy her family if it surfaced, and she had no intention of allowing anyone, least of all Edmund Ashby, to look at her closely enough to find it. Which made it particularly inconvenient that across the glittering length of the Harcastle ballroom, while Edith shone gold and laughing on his arm, the Duke was looking directly at Rosalind, not at her sister, at her. And his expression was not the polite blankness of a man performing social duty. It was something she recognized from a willow tree 3 years ago, and had spent every day since trying to forget. He remembered. She looked away first. That was the only power she had left in that room, and she used it deliberately, turning her gaze to the dark window beside her, to the cold glass and the black night beyond it, and her own faint reflection. A woman in a dress the color of sage, neither fashionable nor unfashionable, chosen specifically to attract nothing. She had become very skilled at chosen invisibility. It was, she had decided at some point in the last 3 years, the only reliable form of protection available to a woman in her position. She set the untouched ratafia on the window ledge and decided she would leave within the hour. She did not leave within the hour. She knew the moment he excused himself from Edith, because the quality of the room changed. The way a room changes when the most significant person in it begins to move through it with intention. She felt it before she saw it, and then she saw it, his dark reflection appearing in the window glass beside her own, and she had perhaps 3 seconds to compose her face into something that would not betray her before he spoke. "Miss Fenworth," she turned. He was closer than she had expected. Edmund Ashby at a distance was formidable in the way of things that command landscapes. Edmund Ashby at 4 feet was something else entirely, and she was extremely irritated at herself for noticing. "Your Grace." Her curtsy was exactly the right depth. Not warm, not cold. "Correct. You have been standing at this window," he said, "for the better part of an hour. I find the room warm. You have not danced. I am not much for dancing." He looked at her with those grey eyes, and the difficulty with grey eyes, she had always thought, was that they did not give themselves away the way darker or lighter eyes did. They simply watched and left the interpretation entirely to the person being watched. "We have met before," he said. It was not a question. Her heart performed something she chose to categorize as an involuntary physiological response and nothing more. "We were introduced this evening, Your Grace. Before this evening." She held his gaze and kept her face entirely still. "I don't believe so." It was the first lie she had told him. It sat in her mouth like something metallic. He studied her for a moment with the expression of a man who knows he is being lied to and is deciding, for reasons she could not identify, to allow it. "Then I apologize," he said. "You reminded me of someone. A common enough occurrence in a crowded room." "Not for me," he said quietly. And then, before she could find anything to do with that, he inclined his head with perfect courtesy and returned to her sister. Rosalind turned back to the window and pressed her fingers very lightly against the cold glass and breathed. She should also note, for the sake of honesty with herself, that Lady Comstock, a sharp-faced woman in violet who had been watching the exchange from 12 feet away with the focused appetite of someone composing tomorrow's gossip, had seen every moment of it. Rosalind filed this away and did not allow it to concern her. Not yet. The engagement was announced 6 weeks later. She heard it at breakfast from her mother, who delivered the news with the particular radiance of a woman who has been waiting years to say something of this magnitude. Edith was across the table, golden and glowing, and she looked at Rosalind with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite triumph and occupied the uneasy territory between them. Edith was not unkind. She had never been unkind. She simply existed in the particular way of beautiful younger sisters, effortlessly, completely, in a way that left very little air in a room for anyone else. "Rosalind," her mother said, with the brisk tenderness of a woman who considered sentimentality an indulgence, "you will naturally play a central role in the wedding preparations. The Duke has a great estate to manage, and Edith will need your steadiness." She would be useful. She was always useful. It was the primary role available to a woman who was not beautiful enough to be decorative and not wealthy enough to be independent. She was steady. She was capable. She was the sister who managed things. "Of course," she said, and her voice was perfectly composed, and she reached for the teapot, and no one in that room saw anything in her face. What she had not managed was what would happen when the Duke of Mere came to call. He came 4 days after the announcement. He sat in the drawing room with Edith beside him, and her mother beaming from the settee, and Rosalind on a chair near the fireplace with her embroidery, which she was using in its traditional function as a reason to look at something other than the room. He was attentive to Edith. He said the correct things. He was, she noted with the detached precision she had cultivated, performing the role of a man courting a woman he had chosen, performing it well, and performing it towards someone other than himself. She did not allow herself to think about what she meant by that. Then her mother was called to speak with the housekeeper, and Edith excused herself with a transparency that was almost endearing, and they were alone. Rosalind set down her embroidery and looked at him directly. "Your Grace," she said, "you did not need to maneuver this." He looked at her steadily. "No," he agreed, "but your mother and your sister are very accommodating. What is it you wanted to say?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing not between words but between kinds of honesty. "I have been thinking," he said finally, "about a garden party 3 summers ago. A woman under a willow tree who told me that the problem with men of great consequence was that they listened only to the echo of their own importance, and that this was why they so rarely understood anything of actual value." The embroidery in her lap became very interesting. "She was right," he said. "I thought about it for a long time afterward. I looked for her the following season, and she was not in London. I looked again the season after that." He stopped. "I did not know her name. I knew only that she had dark hair and a precise way of speaking and grey eyes." "Brown," she said involuntarily. "My eyes are brown." The corner of his mouth moved. "I stand corrected." Then, more quietly, I knew only that she had made me feel, in 40 minutes under a willow tree, more genuinely known than I had felt in years, and that I had been a fool not to ask her name before she walked away. Rosalind looked at him across the drawing room with the fire warm at her back, and felt the door she had shut 6 weeks ago rattle very slightly on its hinges. She did not allow it to open. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "you are engaged to my sister. I am aware of that." "Then I am not certain what purpose this conversation serves." He held her gaze. "Nor am I," he said. But I find I am unable to sit in this house and pretend I did not spend 2 years looking for the woman who is sitting 4 feet from me, and has just corrected my description of her own eyes. She stood. She was not going to have this conversation. She was not going to sit in her mother's drawing room and feel things she had spent 3 years methodically dismantling. Not for a man who had walked into a ballroom 6 weeks ago and chosen her sister. Not for a man who was now engaged and therefore entirely and without exception unavailable. "I think," she said, "that you should drink your tea." She left the room. It was the second time she had walked away from him, and it was, she told herself firmly, the correct decision. It was also considerably harder than the first time. The wedding preparations began in earnest in March, and Rosalind threw herself into them with the focused energy of a woman who has decided that busyness is indistinguishable from peace, provided one maintains it at sufficient intensity. She managed the guest lists, the modiste appointments, the flowers and the menu and the order of the ceremony. Her mother called her invaluable. Rosalind understood it simply as what happens when a person needs to be too occupied to think. It was during the 3rd week of March that the second letter arrived from Mr. Graves. Rosalind had been expecting it. She had been expecting it since the first letter arrived in November, 4 months ago, 3 weeks after the death of a man named Gerald Pitt, whose estate was now being settled, and whose personal correspondence was apparently of interest to his solicitor's subordinate. She had paid Graves nothing herself. Her mother had paid him using the last of the household reserve in December, believing the matter closed. Rosalind had known the moment she learned of the payment that it was not closed. Men like Graves did not close matters. They opened them wider. The letters she had written to Gerald Pitt were the secret she had been carrying since she was 19. She had believed herself in love with him in the weeks before the garden party, before the willow tree and the grey eyes, in the 40 minutes that had rearranged something fundamental inside her. She had not known he was married. She had discovered it 3 months after writing the letters, and she had ended all contact immediately. And she had told no one, and she had spent the years since being as invisible as possible and hoping the matter would remain buried. Gerald Pitt had kept the letters. He had died 6 months ago, and Graves had found them in the estate inventory and recognized an opportunity. The second letter was more specific than the first. A sum, a deadline, and a line at the end very quiet and very precise, noting that the forthcoming marriage of Miss Edith Fenworth to the Duke of Mere was certain to attract a great deal of public interest. Rosalind sat with the letter for 1 hour. Then she went to speak with Edith. She found her sister at the writing desk in her room, composing what appeared to be a rather long letter, the address on which Rosalind noted before Edith covered it. Captain R. Holloway, 3rd Cavalry. A name she had not heard before. She filed it carefully. "You know about Graves," she said. Edith set down her pen. "Mama told me in November. And the payment, yes." Rosalind sat in the chair by the window. "Edith, the engagement. Did you accept Edmund's courtship because of the letters?" Her sister's hand stilled on the desk. The silence was its own answer. "The first letter from Graves arrived the same week Lord Everleigh's dinner party introduced you to the Duke," Rosalind said quietly. "I thought the timing was coincidence." It wasn't. Edith turned in her chair, and her face was younger than it usually appeared, stripped of the golden ease she wore in public. "I thought if there was a Duke's name attached to the family, Graves would consider the risk too great to continue," she said. "I thought it would protect you." Her voice tightened. "You always fix everything yourself, and tell no one and shoulder it alone. And I was so tired of watching you do that, Rosalind. I wanted to fix something for you for once." The complicated shape of love that arrives wearing the face of something you mistook for a simpler. Emotion settled over Rosalind like a weight that was also, somehow, a warmth. "You could have told me," she said. "You would have refused to let me help." This was entirely true, and they both knew it. "Captain Holloway," Rosalind said. Edith blinked. "The letter you were writing when I came in." A long moment passed. Then Edith said, very quietly, "I met him at Cousin Margaret's in October, before the Duke began his courtship. I have been trying very hard not to think about him." Rosalind looked at her sister for a long moment. Then she stood and she straightened her dress and she said, "I am going to Mere House." Edith stared at her. "Rosalind, someone needs to fix something," she said. "It may as well be me." She did not allow herself to think too carefully about the decision on the coach ride to Mere House, because careful thought would have produced sensible objections, and she had already decided that her instinct for sensibility had cost her enough. She sent her card up and waited in the entrance hall in her plainest bonnet, and Edmund came down in 3 minutes, which was immediately, which told her something she chose to note and not yet examine. He took one look at her face and said, "Come into the study." She told him everything. The letters, Gerald Pitt, the 3 years of carrying the secret, Edith's reason for accepting his courtship, Graves, the first payment, the second letter, and the sum and the deadline it contained. She told him in the same even voice she used for everything difficult, with her hands folded and her back straight, and she did not look away from his face once. When she finished, the study was very quiet. "Edith accepted my courtship," he said slowly, "to protect you. Yes, and you came here today to protect Edith. I came to ask for your help," she said. "Graves will not be deterred by anything short of a consequence he is not currently afraid of. He is a subordinate clerk, leveraging estate correspondence without his principal's knowledge. The principal solicitor is, I believe, an honest man who does not know what Graves has been doing. With the right approach, the matter can be resolved through the firm's own interest in its reputation. But that approach requires—" "A duke," he said. "A duke," she confirmed. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the drawing room, and from the Harcastle ballroom, and from a willow tree that she had spent 3 years insisting she had forgotten. After a moment he said, "The letters, what you wrote to Pitt, were the feelings genuine at the time?" She had not expected that question. "I was 19, she said. "I believed so. I have since learned the difference between feeling something intensely and feeling something true." "And now?" His voice was very quiet. "Can you tell the difference now?" She stood. "Your Grace, Edmund," he said it simply, "you have just told me the most private truth of your life in order to protect your sister. I think you can manage my given name." She looked at him across the study and the fire and 3 years and an engagement and everything complicated that stood between this moment and any other version of it, and she said very quietly, "Yes, I can tell the difference now." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he went to the desk and wrote 2 letters with quick, decisive strokes, sealed them, rang for his man, and gave low instructions she could not hear. He turned back to her. "Graves will be dealt with by the end of the week," he said. "His principal has no knowledge of this and will be appalled. The letters will be returned to you directly, unopened, as far as anyone beyond this room is concerned." He stopped. "I also need to speak with Edith, Edmund. She accepted my courtship to protect you," he said. "She is brave and she is kind and she deserves a man who will look at her the way I am looking at you right now. I believe that man currently holds the rank of captain in the 3rd Cavalry." Something moved in his expression. "I think she has known for some time that I am not him. I think perhaps she has been waiting for someone to make it possible to say so." Rosalind stood in the study of Mere House and thought about her sister covering the address on a letter, and she thought about love that arrives in complicated forms. And she thought about a door in her chest that had been closed for 3 years. "You will cause talk," she said. "A broken engagement. People will say I displaced my own sister." "Lady Comstock will say precisely that," he said, with the calm of a man who has already decided how to handle Lady Comstock. "She will say it loudly, and in several drawing rooms, and she will be wrong. And I will be very pleasantly present each time she is wrong, until she finds something more interesting to discuss." He crossed the room and stopped before her. close enough that she had to look up at him. "I looked for you for 2 years," he said. "I found you in a ballroom on someone else's arm. Then I found you in a drawing room, and you told me to drink my tea and walked away. Then you walked into my house in a plain bonnet and told me the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." He stopped. "I am not a man who requires an elaborate invitation, Rosalind. But I would like one conversation that neither of us walks away from." The fire settled. London continued its indifferent business outside the windows. She thought about the door she had closed on the night of the Harcastle ball. She thought about what it had cost to keep it closed and toward what end. And she thought that she was 24 years old, and had spent 3 years being careful and steady and useful, and that those were good and necessary things, but that they were not the only things available to her. "One conversation," she said. "To begin with," he said. And for the first time since she had stood at a ballroom window 6 weeks ago and felt something close inside her chest, Rosalind Fenworth felt it open. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. Edith was spoken to gently and honestly, and she wept a little, and then she admitted that she had been composing letters to Captain Holloway in her head since October, and was deeply relieved, and that she considered it a point of personal pride that her sister had brought a duke to his senses through the sheer force of being difficult and honest and impossible to forget. Rosalind told her she was being absurd. Edith told her she was in love. Rosalind did not argue, because arguing would have required claiming otherwise, and she had decided that comfortable dishonesty was a habit she was done with entirely. There was talk, as she had known there would be. The particular shape of this talk, the older Fenworth sister stepping into the space the younger had vacated, was precisely the kind that society savors. Lady Comstock did say it loudly in several drawing rooms, with an enthusiasm that suggested she considered it her finest contribution of the season. Edmund was present each time. He said nothing. He simply looked at Lady Comstock with the pleasant grey eyes of a man who has nothing to prove, and all the time in the world, and Lady Comstock consistently found somewhere else to be within 30 seconds. Rosalind watched this and permitted herself to find it quietly satisfying. The engagement was announced in June. The wedding was small by the standards of what a Duke of Mere's wedding might have been. Because they both preferred it that way, and because neither of them had any remaining interest in performing for rooms full of people. On the morning of the wedding, Edith came to braid a white ribbon through Rosalind's dark hair and said, entirely without irony, "I told you that you were in love. You told me I had brought a duke to heel by being difficult." "Both things are true," Edith said serenely, and kissed her cheek. Captain Holloway's proposal, it should be noted, had arrived in April, and Edith's reply had been sent within the hour. That evening, in the garden of Mere's country estate, with the last of the summer light coming long and warm through the oak trees, Edmund said, "I have been thinking about the willow tree." "Have you?" "You told me the problem with men of great consequence was that they listened only to the echo of their own importance." He looked at her sideways. "You are entirely correct. I generally am. You are," he agreed. "It is one of your more arresting qualities." He took her hand, which had become a habit of his since March, that she had stopped pretending to find unremarkable. "I want to say something I have not said clearly enough." She waited. "I am sorry," he said, "for the 2 years I spent looking for a woman whose name I should have asked for before she walked away. I am sorry for the season I spent choosing from the wrong room, because I had stopped trusting what I recognized. And I am sorry that you spent 3 years carrying something alone that you should never have carried alone." His hand was warm and certain around hers. "I cannot undo any of it, but I intend to spend a considerable amount of time ensuring it is no longer necessary." Rosalind looked at him in the long summer light and thought about a door that had been closed for 3 years, and was now, finally, entirely open. "You already have," she said, and the quiet woman, who had stood at the far window of a ballroom in a dress the color of sage, and watched the world make its choice, found in the end that the world's choices were not the final word on the matter. She was. If this story found you, you already know why Rosalind stayed in your chest long after it ended. She is every woman who was steady when she wanted to fall apart, invisible when she deserved to be seen, and certain she had already missed her moment. Like this video if you felt every word of it. Tell us in the comments which line made you stop breathing for a second. We read every single one. Subscribe for stories every week about the quiet ones who turned out to be everything. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that being overlooked is not the same as being unseen. Not by the right person. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.